You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. This episode is about psychedelics. What they are not, various types of psychedelics, some scientific research in psychedelics, and Carlos shares some personal experiences. Now, this is a bit of a sensitive subject, but psychedelics are becoming more normalized in America these days, and it's a subject that's worth talking about. So let's talk about it.
I've got a train for you.
Yeah, do you really?
You want to ride this train for a moment?
Yeah, let's ride this train.
Maybe even a long moment?
Yeah.
To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic.
I love it.
Isn't that cool?
I love it.
You know who said that?
No.
The person who coined the phrase psychedelics.
Tell me about that.
Humphrey Osmond. He was a psychiatrist. I think he was from the UK. And since that's kind of the topic of tonight is this, taboo but slowly becoming less taboo topic of psychedelics, I figured we'd start with the very guy who coined the phrase.
Coined the term. I love it. Years ago, I had mentioned something. We had a brief conversation about this topic, and I had used the word hallucinogen. And you had told me that you didn't like that word. You preferred the word psychedelic. Mm-hmm. It's funny how many years later I look back and that seems so obvious to me now.
It does.
And I think, and this is something we're going to get into tonight, right? Mm-hmm. Is the criminalization of these substances.
And decriminalization.
Right? So it's a two-sided coin there. Mm-hmm. The word hallucinogen is like the word hallucination, right? Mm-hmm. To generate hallucinations, which is a pathological term. And it's the wrong term.
It is.
For this.
It's perceiving something that actually isn't there.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the reasons we're doing this particular episode is because we were inspired by some current events, and it caused us to start talking about this, and we decided that we need to do a show, which is Denver in Colorado.
It's a hot topic.
It is a hot topic right now. Just voted to decriminalize psilocybin or magic mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. The city, not the state.
Yeah, in the city. Yeah, and that was a big topic. It was all over social media, and just sort of indicated that this is a topic for us to get into tonight.
It is. It's current, and even if it weren't current, the idea of our show has been about authenticity, exploration, excellence, really delving into things. And outside of the misuse that sometimes occurs, the thing itself, psychedelics, plant medicines, etc., there's a definite current within that has always, from the very beginning, and will probably always be, involved in deep exploration, deep transformation, and not at all concerned with just getting high or something like that. And so it kind of runs along the subject matter to a certain degree, maybe parallel to what we've talked about a lot. And it's certainly been maybe a stimulant, to use another term, for a lot of discovery.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of the people we've interviewed and, myself, and, it's been a source of learning, a source of exploration.
Sure, yeah. And our show is about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. And what if there was a pill that has been shown in many, many facets of healthcare to improve health? And what if this pill also was shown to boost creativity exponentially? I mean, to the point where breakthroughs happen in industries, right? And what if this same pill really did put a person on an inner journey towards a better version of themselves, a quest for excellence? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about things that actually have been demonstrated to do all of those things. Mm-hmm. These are substances, and these are things we're going to get into that we're talking about actual research, clinical trials that show that these kinds of substances decrease suicide risk, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, migraines, cluster headaches, all these kinds of things, and if anybody hears that there was a breakthrough medication that could do all those things, we'd be very, very excited about it. But when we reveal that that breakthrough medication is not new at all, it's an ancient plant medicine or a psychedelic drug, then we can feel the stigma start to settle in.
I think that a lot of that stigma comes along with, almost a 1950s style mentality. Nothing wrong with the 1950s per se, but there's this idea of kind of everything having to fit into neat little boxes, and there's sort of like a Hollywood impression we get of that 1950s style thinking. I don't know. We just see it in all the movies and the TV shows, and there's a style. I mean, there's a definite kind of like mindset that comes along with that. It's oversimplified. It's trusting authority figures, especially with white coats on, and trust what the authorities say. That starts to become a little bit offensive after a while. Like, you're going to ask me to trust one more time, really?
Yeah.
The same people who lied for 40 years about this, and then it's natural to have a little bit of suspicion.
Yeah.
Along with, I'm not saying that it's a great idea to just sort of reject everything you hear. I'm not saying that, but by now, after you start to accrue all of these examples of being lied to and studies being fudged or outright, suppressed or completely, the opposite intention, right? Being shown. After a while, anyone paying attention would be justified in being a bit suspicious.
Absolutely. And I'm having an image of something you said just a little bit ago about trusting people in white coats. Mm-hmm. What's funny is when psychedelic substances were first, really being researched, they sort of started to really come on the scene in the 40s, and then like in the 50s and early 60s, there was a lot going on. Mm-hmm. It was men in white coats that were studying these things. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration had reported that from 1950 to 1965, there were over 1,000 scientific papers, dozens of books, and like multiple international conferences on psychedelics.
15 years worth.
Yeah, 15 years. And then it all ended when we had the Controlled Substances Act.
Right.
Which shut all that down. And I know you and I had both read an article, and this is information that's easily findable on the internet, which came from an interview from John Ehrlichman, who was a Nixon advisor. Mm-hmm. And I've actually got the quote right here.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to read it because we're talking about suspicion and who do we trust and all of that. And this is what they had to say. Okay, quote. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. End quote.
Smoking gun and the gun.
Yeah, I mean, not even hiding it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, it's upsetting and sad. And the reason to me it's so upsetting is because of the tremendous benefit that those substances have on people that really, really, really need those benefits. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's just really criminal to do that.
It is. Nowadays, there are so many references that anyone who wants to look into it, like you say, they could easily find it. I mean, I remember just even the book by Jay Stevens, Storming Heaven. It talks a lot about the CIA and their agenda and the way they integrated into the hippie movement and various key players like Ken Kesey and Timothy Leary and a variety of folks that were involved in being influencers and why they were kind of in trouble with the law, and why the FBI was involved, the CIA was involved. It's very complex, but it reads in an interesting way, like truly for conspiracy enthusiasts, it's an interesting read, because you're actually looking at, this is legitimately what happened. Here are the people. Here are the key players. This is the sequence of events. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's been a number of years since I read it, but I remember just kind of dropping my jaw and having to pick it up off the ground every so often, because it was just like, what?
Yeah.
That happened? Like, for real? And then I see it
amazing.
repeated in other places, and it's like, yeah, that's legit.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of effort went into creating extra unnecessary fear around these things, and it always bothers me when an element of fear is added to something. Like, for example, if there's a medication, right, which has some healing benefits for human beings, and then also has some side effects, we don't need to amplify either side. Just discuss the effects, discuss the benefits, discuss what could be considered side effects, look at them for what they are, teach people about what they are. We don't need to upplay one side or downplay the other side. Because then what happens is, when people realize that something has been exaggerated, okay, so for example, the war on drugs has exaggerated the dangers. Not saying there aren't dangers there. We wouldn't say that, but to exaggerate the dangers, then when young people realize that there were exaggerations,
now they don't trust you.
And now they throw caution to the wind, and now they make themselves more vulnerable to the dangers that might actually be there.
Yeah. You got to treat people as human beings, not as, little children to be controlled.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing about psychedelics that's, I think, different than other drugs is that psychedelics has more of a capacity for opening up your ability to see things. What does that mean? It means that it acts on the part of the mind that has to do with perception itself in a variety of really interesting ways that are different than, say, just an opiate or a dopamine situation like cocaine. It's very different.
Yeah.
And this is definitely not something that's particularly habit forming or addictive in the normal sense of the word.
Yeah.
Not saying people can't fall into a habit of using it or misusing it. Just saying it's really not. It doesn't lend itself to addiction as well as, say, heroin or alcohol does. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have the same harmful effects. And yet, as a class of experiences of chemicals that can stimulate an experience, it's really unique because it focuses so much on perception, on awakening perception, on seeing things, hearing things, and feeling things from different perspectives and angles. I've always loved the analogy of psychedelics being either a microscope or a telescope. You can look inwardly and see things in great detail, or you can look outwardly and see big, broad, large, long, far-reaching perspectives on things, about the universe, cosmically, right? And you hear this expressed in poetry from people who have done plant medicines or psychedelics, and you see it in film, and you read about it in books. And I also love the analogy of it being either a mirror or a window. In the sense that they're a mirror, I think, just the idea that it reflects back to you what you brought to the table. When you took the psychedelic, when you went through the ritual, whatever it was, you are getting reflections all around you. And you tend to see yourself in things, right? It's like it's being reflected back to you. So there's very much of a mirror-like quality there. It's like a window because, when you look out of your house and you look outside, you see a whole new world out there. Psychedelics offers the opportunity to view a whole new world, to look at a new dimension. It's a window into other realities. And it's also a window to your soul.
Absolutely. And I would add to that this is a good time to give credit to the original traditions where these things came from, right? These were usually the substances managed by the shaman, right? And their cultural and spiritual practices, their religious practices, and they played a significant role. And people who maybe don't agree with that sort of thing, fine, okay, don't agree with it, but we do have to apply cultural relativity. We have to understand that if it's really valuable to the people in that culture, then we need to step off. I think part of the reason I feel that way is because I'm an acupuncturist. Mm-hmm. And there was a time in California when acupuncturists were practicing. Ronald Reagan was the governor at the time, and he passed a law that made acupuncture illegal. And several acupuncturists were immediately arrested for practicing medicine without a license. And one very famous one, Miriam Lee, apparently she was one of the people that sort of allowed herself to be arrested. She's very courageous.
An act of social disobedience in a way.
Yeah, and she got arrested, and she was a very, very good acupuncturist, by the way, very, very good. Miriam Lee, was in court, and scores of her patients showed up to protest and to try to make a point and say, "Hey, look."
A point? Was that a pun?
To make a point? Yeah. They were trying to get to the point. Yeah, they were trying to go deep. Yeah, and pierce the heart of the lawmakers, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened was their overall message was, look, in a free country, we have a right to choose the form of healthcare that we feel is helping us, regardless of whatever somebody else thinks, right? Mm-hmm. What happened was they made acupuncture experimental. So then when you were doing it in universities and things like that, okay, it was okay. And then as time went on, Jerry Brown became the governor and made it legal. And today, the AMA is recommending it for certain things, and there's lots of research on it, and it works. It's kind of a similar story to psychedelics in a way, right?
Yeah.
That it was something that is ancient, that was always there, and then was criminalized. It was put on top of it, and really made matters worse and took away something of value, at least to certain populations, if not potentially valuable to everybody.
Right. And you got people who really aren't criminals in the normal sense of the word, who are serving life prison sentences.
Yeah.
Now they're exposed to real criminals and forced to adapt in order to survive in that environment, which is a really tricky thing to do.
Absolutely.
I think most people would look at those folk as just, yes, they technically broke the law. However, the mindset's very different. Yeah. If you compare them and their basic, psychological makeup and how they behave and all that kind of stuff, very different than, your average criminal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think most people would agree that that's just not the same.
Yeah. And let's remember that little quote we looked at earlier from John Ehrlichman. Right? Yeah. They knew they were lying about it when they made the law. So right. the law was never a righteous law.
No.
There's a very interesting study that was done. It was kind of more data gathering. It came from surveys and things. They surveyed thousands of marginalized women in Vancouver, because marginalized females in urban settings tend to have a very high suicide rate. And what they did is they looked at lifetime use of psychedelics that occurred naturalistically. Right? So these were not experiments where they gave these substances to people. Mm-hmm. These are people that use them on their own, in their own way, sometime in their life, right? And what they found was that among the people that had used psychedelics that were part of this group, they had about a 60% decrease hazard of suicide. The reason I point this out is this was not psychedelic-assisted therapy that was studied. These are people in an urban environment that took acid at a party or ate some mushrooms a couple times. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Even those people that did it that way had a substantial decrease in their suicide risk. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to read their conclusion,
all right,
if I might. Right. Our findings demonstrate that naturalistic psychedelic drug use is independently associated with reduced suicidality.
That's a word?
That suicidality is a word. And it was in a study, so it's a real word. Now, in their research, they did find that people that used crystal meth had increased suicide rates, and they did find that a history of child abuse had increased suicide rates. So we're looking at all these things in a naturalistic setting that happened on their own, and then seeing a very, very clear outcome. I just want to push this point that I like this idea of natural use. I'm not a big fan of the idea of these things becoming legal only for medical purposes.
Right.
I think that's important because remember, these things came from the shamanistic world, from ancient cultures, and there's wisdom in allowing that to coexist.
I agree. We have to have some freedom to work with our own bodies, our own minds, and the dangers are just really ridiculously overstated.
Right.
I'm not saying there aren't some, but if you look into it, it's really overstated. Most people who have, aren't you worried about a bad trip? Guess what? Most people who've had bad trips go, yeah, it was a bad trip. It was terrible. And they're fine. And they hold on a job and they have kids and they go out throughout their life and they tell that little story about how they had a bad trip one time.
Yeah.
And it meant nothing really. In the big picture of their life, it was nothing.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, what else did you get out of it? And many times it's the very same people who had a bad trip, quote unquote, will be telling you, well, actually it was kind of cool because, and they'll tell you this other side of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just not sold on the whole idea of like, oh, be careful because you could have a bad trip. Like it's some kind of random thing that you spin the barrel and pull the trigger. It's a Russian roulette with your brain.
To call it Russian roulette is just a stupid analogy.
Yeah, it takes away the idea of set and setting. Like you have no intentionality in it at all.
Right. And I want to point out that the person who invented LSD, Albert Hoffman,
discovered.
Discovered, right? Yeah. Because remember, he modified chemicals from ergot fungus, right? So it does, the basics of it does come from a plant, a microscopic fungus.
It was on the shelf. He didn't know what to use it for. He spilled it on himself.
Yeah. And then,
wow, that's interesting.
He had an experience, right? And then when he consciously chose to dose himself, because I just read this in preparations for tonight, he took 250 micrograms.
It's a healthy dose.
And the way he described it was a bad trip. Albert Hoffman's first self-induced trip was a bad trip. But what he described after the trip was that it changed him in wonderful ways.
It's catharsis.
It made his life better.
Yeah, what do they call that? A healing crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I would say going to the hospital and getting surgery is a bad trip to the hospital.
Hell yeah.
And it can hurt, and it can be uncomfortable, it can be scary, and it can save your life.
Yeah. What's the worst thing that ever happened to you?
There you go.
Same thing.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
When I was a child, I had appendicitis. And it was terrifying, and it was scary, and I had to get all kinds of uncomfortable tests. And I remember going in for surgery, and they saved me. And I had a child's fear with all that. But now it's over, and I'm a healthy, functioning adult doing a podcast right now.
That's right. Well, and we're talking about it in a sort of dissociated way, like overarching ideas, right? But there is a methodology that works. There is a technique. There's a way of having an experience with a psychoactive compound such as LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, mushrooms, et cetera. There's a way of going about it that all but guarantees that you're going to have a profound, life-changing, potentially healing experience. There is a way to transform and transmute a heavy, darker experience into one that's filled with light and joy and bliss and discovery and healing. There is a structure that you can create for having a very conscious trip. And I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you lay out the menu? How does this go?
First of all, if you know what it is you're taking and the approximate dose that would be right, then the primary thing that has to happen is that you have to have the right mindset going in. And you've got to choose a setting that is not going to be dangerous or upsetting or, complicated in ways that you don't anticipate. If you do those two things, it's much easier to guarantee that you're going to have a good time. If you have experience with controlling your thoughts and structuring your thoughts, let's say you've done, I don't know, some meditation courses and you're a meditator, you're a yoga practitioner, someone who really, really thinks about this stuff. Let's say you've done some psychotherapy for a while, and you're doing well.
What would you say about even somebody who maybe has trained their mind a lot, like within academic disciplines or something?
Maybe the caveat is, if you've got a lot of heavy stuff going in and you take a psychedelic, you're probably going to at some point have to deal with it. So if you're the kind of person who says, you know what, I do want to deal with it. I don't want to have this heavy stuff inside of me be something I have to suppress. I want to be able to learn from it. I want to be able to heal. If you have that attitude, then there are plenty of ways to go about bringing it out in a positive way. You can interact with your parts, if you want to put it that way, like, turn it into a parts thing where I've got a part of me that feels hatred towards X, Y, or Z. Or I have a part of me that's afraid and terrified of X, Y, or Z. Those are parts. They're not all of you. It's not the entire person. It's a part. So in the old days, you might call that like, if you want to use a psychological metaphor, it's like you have demons.
Yeah.
Or if you've had bad experiences, they're like skeletons.
Yeah.
But really, I'm just saying parts. They're a part of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can bring those parts out and you can interact with them in a very vivid way under psychedelics, especially if you have a structure to work with. So it's always good, if you haven't done a psychedelic, it's good to have a guide. What does a psychopomp do, right? The Greek psychopomp, like Hermes or any of these psychopomps, they guide you through the underworld. They take you from the living to the dead and back again, or vice versa, right? Just it's there as a way of traversing the sea of consciousness. So you need to invoke protection and guidance. That might be in the form of a physical person, and or if you have a philosophical or spiritual tradition that you follow, it might mean calling upon quote unquote the Most High, or truth, or positive feeling. If you're more of a humanist, you can call upon truth and love and connectedness and understanding. If it's a religious thing, it might be calling upon your deity and asking for protection, or an angel, or your ancestors, like they do in a lot of traditions. But the point is that you assign another part of you to witness and help you. It's hypnosis. It's auto-hypnosis. It's auto-suggestion.
Okay.
And it's controlling your mental environment. That's the set part of it, the mindset. And the physical person who has the experience, who's the psychopomp, acts as a person who can watch you, guide you where necessary, and stay the fuck away when not necessary. Like literally back up and go, you know what? It's okay. That person might need to go through this. So it takes a little bit of experience to know when to step back. Sometimes it's just all about that person saying, I'm here for you if you need me. But if you're okay and you want to go through this right now on your own, that's okay too. Because I believe in you. What is that? The pre-frame of that is, I believe in you. I have faith that something inside of you is going to take you through this.
Yeah.
And that can be encouraging.
Okay.
An example I'd love to share is when I had my first experience, I took way too much.
Okay.
I was, I don't know, maybe 18. And I took probably at least 4 times the recommended dose of LSD.
Okay.
And it was my first time. And, tripping balls might be the technical term for that. But yeah, I was really, 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 really in another state. And it didn't stop. So the next day, sun came out and the day was progressing. I was still feeling like I was there. And I'm mentioning this story because there was something that one of my best friends at the time said to me that had an effect because of the pre-frame of what he said. I said, yeah, I'm really, really upset because I think I've gone crazy and I'm never coming back, and this is it for me. I've lost my mind and I feel terrible about it because, oh man, I'm never going to be the same. This is it. And I explained to him what happened. And he said to me, yeah, unfortunately, you are going to come down from this experience. I wish I could say you'd stay there forever. I wish I could stay there forever, because it was it's probably one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. But unfortunately, you are coming down. And it kind of did this little loop in my head. I remember thinking, unfortunately? Here I am panicking.
Yeah.
I'm like scared. I've lost my mind. Made the most irresponsible choice of my life. I'm fucked.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I got off the phone. I went into the restroom. As I was washing my hands, and I kind of gazed up at the mirror. And when I gazed up in the mirror, I saw two dark tunnels, which were called eyes, staring back at me. And in the reflection, I could see the T-shirt I had on, which was happened to be a T-shirt of Jim Morrison. And I was about the same age as he was, maybe a little younger. We had a very similar look at that time, same hair length, same body type and bone structure and things like that at the time. And so peripherally, it's kind of like I was looking into the mirror, but I was also looking into this other mirror, which was my shirt.
Yeah.
And the energy of that embodiment, right, which was, living that lifestyle and all that. And it occurred to me that there was another way of experiencing this that was not based in fear, not based in worry or anxiety. Because I kind of thought, like, why am I not enjoying this? What's there to be afraid of? And I kind of was thinking to myself, like, who the fuck are you? I don't recognize you. This whole, you're scared and you lost your mind. Didn't you do this because you were curious about exploring your mind? And wasn't that your initial intention? So what are you complaining about? And so in that moment, all my fear flipped, and I was now feeling really excited. So I went from feeling really, really depressed for hours to feeling really, really excited.
And then you came down.
Well, and then I started coming down. and I went in, and I remember telling my girlfriend at the time, my friends, is like, you know what? Not only am I going to do it again, because I had said, oh, I'm never doing this again. Not only am I doing it again, I'm going to do it as soon as possible, and I can't wait. And they're looking at me like, who is this person?
He has lost his mind.
He has lost his mind. Here he is, like, opposite end of the spectrum, pendulum swing here. Anyway, all that to say that a good psychopomp, a good guide, a psychedelic guide, knows what to say at the right moment or what not to say. And it's their quality of being, it's their therapeutic use of self, to use a term we use, right? That helps the experience go better. And whether a person is experiencing a pleasant experience or they're experiencing a more challenging experience that has more contrast in it, that's not the determining factor of a good trip or a bad trip as far as I'm concerned. A good trip is any trip that you learn from, any trip that you take where you expand who you are and your model of the world, or you learn something important. So I don't find that bad experiences have to stay bad. Hundreds of times I've witnessed in others and in myself a bad experience unfolding into the best experience of their life or my life. A breakup leads to meeting the woman of your dreams, or you lose one job only to find some other career that you've been meaning to do for a long time. I mean, things roll into other things. And if you accept that and you're into learning, if you're into the experience of expanding and speeding up your ability to transform, then you ought to do psychedelics. That's my recommendation. Do it. Because those conditions, if you can create them, will guarantee that you have a fantastic experience. One that's not just visually interesting, but one where you learn philosophically. You deepen your experience and appreciation for things. So to put that again, real simply, control your mindset. Have a plan. What do you want to get out of this? What do you want to remember at the end of this? How do you want to feel when it's all said and done? Have a really clear set of objectives. An objective could be more broad if you want to. It could be something like, I want to explore my mind, but have some details in there. Like what? What part of your mind do you want to discover? Leaving it wide open might not be the best strategy. You might want to say, I want to discover the genius in my mind. I want to learn the part of my mind that can handle anything. I want to learn about the part of my mind which can see into other worlds and find solutions or think out of the box. Having a little bit of definition on that is useful. And the setting part is just choose a safe environment. If it's going to be in a home, it's of a person that you trust, that you wouldn't mind being yourself with. If you can be authentic with the crowd that you're doing it with, you're likely to have a better experience. If you can trust them, that if you were going batshit crazy for 10 minutes, that they would love you and accept you either way. Not to say that everyone takes psychedelics has that experience, but I'm just saying if you allow yourself to go through trauma, to re-imprint or to go through a healing crisis, which can happen, then you want to be with people who can accept you equanimously and see you for who you are, not judging you. Because that secure attachment that you have with them can help stabilize you and allow you to reground, reroot yourself in the presence of people who know you. That's very, very deep.
And, oftentimes there are a lot of people that is not the way they've done it. Or that's not the way they did it first. Somebody just on a whim popped something in the bathroom at a concert.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, is that a wise way to
that doesn't always
explore
go well.
Something like that for the first time? I would think not.
It could go all right.
It could. It could be amazing. It's possible.
Or
it may not be
it could
too
go-
late, but Well, you had gone to Peru.
Yeah.
And, we did a whole episode about you going to, doing the ayahuasca ceremony in Peru. And so there's a shaman, right?
Yeah.
And so it sounded like a lot of these things that you just talked about, the advice that you just gave, was sort of kind of naturally part of that tradition that's been there for a very long time, that you have a guide and that person has experience and wisdom and they've done this and they know how to they know how to take people through it. They're creating a safe environment. It's got all those elements.
It's set and setting.
Yeah.
When they do the ceremony of creating a circle, that's a miniature version of the universe. It's a circle.
Yeah,
right?
nice.
It's a representation of everything that is. It's also kind of an agreement. It's an agreement that we're going to stay within each other's energy and within each other's perceptions. We're not going to go wandering out into the nowhere land in the middle of the night. We're going to stay where we can keep some sort of track of one another.
Right. Let's not go pet the jaguars.
Yeah.
Right.
The burning of sacred incenses, well, that creates a beautiful smell, which has a primal effect on the limbic system. These beautiful aromas have been long used for clearing the air. They would say raising the vibration of the space, calling in angelic beings or deities, and banishing negative entities and negative spirits. That's a very animistic, spiritistic kind of description.
Sure.
But there's a certain logic to it as well.
Yeah.
If you don't have to believe all that necessarily in order to get benefit from going through those steps. I personally am like you, we're open-minded skeptics. I like to go with it, if maybe there are, and let's just go with that because it makes most sense. It's easiest for the subconscious mind and for the whole experience just to believe that there is something special that's being called in.
There's nothing wrong with playing along and behaving as though it were true, even if you don't know.
What harm is that?
Yeah, that's fun. It's just fun.
It's an added layer of story that can be quite beautiful, if nothing else. And I would just say from years and years of experiencing this that it's really hard to argue with the experience, at least for me.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to prove this to anybody else, just saying like for me, that's been my anecdotal experience and I'm sticking to it,
Well, it's been popular in news articles and there's a TED Talk and so on and so forth about the studies that have been done on MDMA and post-traumatic stress disorder, ecstasy and PTSD. And these studies were very, very successful. I mean, they're absolute breakthroughs in the ability to get real results with this population. And they followed the advice that you gave by having psychotherapy before, during, and after 2 to 3 experiences of MDMA. They were the guides. They were able to, guide the experience towards positivity. They didn't do it in like a hospital setting. They made the room pretty and they made it nice and
familiar
incense
objects.
And art and, a nice cushy couch. And
non-clinical.
Yeah, they made it non-clinical.
Yeah.
And they did clinical things while they were there. They checked blood pressure and temperature and, all the vital signs and all that stuff, and the things that could be a little bit clinical. But for the most part, when you're doing, or the studies that have been done where they're doing the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, they're basically just following this. They're following what the shamans and the hippies have been doing all along.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of interesting. It sort of brings up, an elephant in the room. All these studies are being done because the people doing them know that this is going to work.
Yeah.
So the knowledge and the inspiration to do these studies had to come from people using these things illegally. Mm-hmm. It's an elephant in the room, but let's get it out there. You know what I mean?
Ralph Metzner just died, I think, last year. He was a psychotherapist doing LSD-assisted psychotherapy and things like that. And he was one of those original guys doing research. And he probably did a lot of it under the radar kind of thing until he died. But he had some interesting points of view about it. I mean, he was very much in line with what we're saying.
Yeah.
Because you're right. A lot of this stuff was done illegally.
Yeah.
But with the best of intentions, and great things came out of it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there are still some of those original research cases who, for example, ex-alcoholics who did LSD-assisted psychotherapy, who still to this very day, 40 years later, 50 years later, have not touched a drop of alcohol.
Yeah.
It changed them.
Pretty amazing. Yeah, it's
It's
pretty
like a
amazing.
deep reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is one of the things they say. They say like if you do a sufficient dose under the right conditions, it's like hitting the reset button on a lot of things.
Yeah.
You can get underneath the trauma.
And this is where the intention work that you were talking about comes into play. Like if somebody were to just, like I said, take some LSD in the bathroom at a concert, they may not come out of that experience no longer craving alcohol, right? But the idea is when you go into that experience with intent, hey, we're doing this to look inside about issues around that, and you focus the lens on that, then there you go. It's like you said, using it as a microscope or a telescope. You got to aim at something. If you're using a telescope, you kind of need to I'd like to see the moon. You got to have some intent and aim it, and then you can see the moon better.
You have to know your why, because this is the pre-frame, right? The presupposition that you're taking before you even begin. You take it at the concert. Could it be this situation where you're having to sneak it? You're hiding. It's loud. It's dirty. It's perhaps not comfortable. You're taking this thing maybe with a lack of respect. Maybe you're taking it as though it's just sort of like just another drug, and that forms your set, your mindset as you begin. And that's one of the two things that's important for having a good trip is set and setting.
Yeah.
So what's the set when you take it randomly at a concert like that without much consideration is probably pretty random versus someone who has an intention of healing, who does it in an environment where they can meditate for a few minutes, set an intention, say some prayers, do something ritualistic to kind of mark out the territory, so to speak, for the next 12 hours. Those things do imply a certain pre-frame, a certain set of presuppositions. I'm doing this thing that's sacred. I'm taking it into my body with the understanding that it's potentially going to heal me, potentially going to reveal something about me that could be useful. And I'm in it to win it. I'm in with both feet. I'm going to be fully mindful of everything that comes up along the way, and I'm ready. So it's a very different set of pre-frames there, different set of ideas
absolutely.
when you walk in, and that's going to change what comes up.
Yeah. Can we jump into some myths?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
let's just jump into some myths. I'm trying to reflect on things I heard as a kid growing up in school. It'll damage your DNA.
Wrong. Not true.
Yeah.
The experiment that was based on, they basically did the equivalent of taking a vial of LSD and pouring it onto some chromosomes in a petri dish. That is the most stupid, ridiculous, unscientific way of testing it.
So that wasn't even, okay.
If you took a sugar solution or a caffeine solution, it would have done the same thing. It would have damaged the chromosomes.
Right.
So it's not true.
Okay.
It just isn't.
Wow.
Look it up.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. That's just not true.
We already dispelled the suicide risk that you're going to jump off a building. In fact, we talked about how it actually does the opposite. It actually decreases your chances of doing something like that.
Yeah, but let's deal with the in all honesty.
Yeah.
If you're a disturbed person, how would you know that?
If you do have suicidal ideations, suicidal tendencies,
if you are a person who doesn't handle life very well at all, and you're not doing well, and someone doses you with a powerful psychedelic and you're not aware of it, there is a chance that you could do something harmful to yourself.
Sure, absolutely.
That's just because you don't know what you're getting into, and you don't have any talent or skill developed with how to handle life, and then suddenly you throw a psychedelic on it. Well, yeah, it's going to act like a lens.
Yeah.
It's going to focus on what it is you're used to focusing on, which is the negative stuff. So could you potentially do something harmful to yourself? Yeah. It's possible.
Of course. Yeah.
But psychedelics don't by nature cause you to do that. And there's more of a likelihood that you're going to get lost in a bed of flowers somewhere and enjoy that before you ever get to the top of the building and throw yourself off.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, these flowers are gorgeous. Wow, look at that little caterpillar. It's alive. Isn't that cool? And I think I'm part of that caterpillar, and maybe it's part of me. And wow, it's a big world. I mean, it's much more likely to get lost in something interesting like that because you become more childlike.
Psychedelics are highly addictive. True or false?
It doesn't affect the dopamine the way other drugs do. So you could use anything as a way of escaping. But addiction is a medical term,
Yeah.
So if it's truly addictive, then it's creating some kind of a feedback loop in the brain that causes you to crave it. And psychedelics have a very low risk for that because, number one, they don't stimulate the same systems. Right? They work on a completely different pathway. Secondly, the experience can be a little bit uncomfortable. It's not exactly a joy trip the whole way through, as much as I've loved it. There's some nervousness. There's some discomfort when you go through it. It's not always easy. It's no guarantee of being a bliss fest the whole time. You might have to confront some stuff. At the end, you'll be happy you did, but it's not exactly like other drugs where you can ignore your problems and dull your pain. That's not what psychedelics do. If anything, they make you rudely aware of what's there.
Right. All indications are that afterwards, it's probably the last thing somebody wants to do for a while.
Yeah,
for
Usually,
a little while anyways.
They do it once and they're like, "You want to do it again?" No, I'm good.
Yeah. Good for a while.
I'm good for a while.
Yeah.
Because it's intense. There's a lot to process. There's the whole, microdosing thing that's been very popular. We don't know for sure that it's that, but gosh.
Yeah, the rumors are that that's the whole tech industry.
Yeah,
right. It's all
exactly.
the engineers are microdosing
and for the listener, a microdose is maybe like a 10th or even a 20th of an active dose.
Yeah. MAPS had done some very interesting research, and they found the microdosing to be very well tolerated, really helped out with people's moods, with depression, and did boost creativity. That's some pretty amazing things that they reported. So it's hard to say there isn't something there.
It is. they are doing some placebo-controlled studies now. So we're going to find out what, if anything, microdosing does. Is it just placebo effect? Because if so, some of the experiences that people report might be. But I suspect not. I suspect that there's something else going on there that cumulatively happens when you take a microdose of psilocybin or LSD or mescaline. I do. I think that's we've already seen examples where people have taken standardized doses, like 100 or 250. Someone like Walt Disney, for example, who took those things, and Cary Grant, Archibald Leach, right? Cary Grant, who both of whom have great things to say about it.
Yeah, right.
Dr. Stanislav Grof and a lot of these early research subjects and researchers that talk about it being really, really important. Do you ever listen to Jason Silva?
Yes.
He's great.
The YouTube guy.
The YouTube guy.
Yeah. Beautiful rants. Wonderful, beautiful rants.
And listen to his wonderful rants on Instagram. I follow him on Instagram. He's a lot of fun. He speaks fluent Spanish, by the way. I just saw him speaking and doing his muy bien psychedelic rant in Espanol. So you can check that out.
Cool.
But he's quite eloquent in Spanish too. I love that he talks about the power of psychedelics a lot. It's not something that comes up every so often. It's a lot. And I think it stimulates and fuels a lot of his exploration into love, passion, healing, forgiveness, loving the numinous, the great expanse of life and everything in it, and how he falls in love with that sensory experience and describes that along the way. And it's very much like, for the listener who hasn't taken a psychedelic, you can look up Jason Silva, relax, dim the lights, and let him talk you into a trip. Because that's a great sort of experience of like how one thought rolls into another, into another, into another. And it's like you're tumbling delightfully through a set of images. And it's a gallery of images that he's taking you on. It's really stimulating and amazing and blissful if you let it. If you can follow it and just kind of let it go and just drift with it, it's pretty nice. He's very poetic in his delivery.
Very nice.
Yeah. Our senses are things that become areas of focus when you're on a psychedelic. The other thing that happens is that you begin to develop the capacity to use your senses in unique ways. One of those examples is synesthesia, where your senses are crossed. You can, for example, taste color, see a sound. The parts of your brain that are involved with processing those sensory stimuli, they kind of become connected in a way that's maybe unusual. And so we start to process data differently than we normally do. Now, rather than looking at that as a dysfunction, I look at that as an increased function, because now you're using more than one thing to understand the thing you used to use only one thing to understand. So there is an enrichment of experience that I think is pretty powerful.
Wow.
Synesthesia. I become more of a synesthete. And I think as an adolescent, I was doing some synesthetic things. I was leaving my body and passing through walls and having out-of-body experiences and weird shit. But in my late teens and early 20s, as I began to experiment with psychedelics, I began to just sort of spontaneously have that happen again. And I think it's because it was doing some of the same stuff inside my head.
Okay.
So that's definitely not a hindrance to intelligence. If anything, it expands the range of your intelligence. If you let it.
Sure. Well, I've seen some wonderful documentaries on some of these topics, and there's one that comes to mind that I found to be this is somebody's report. This was one of the studies that was done using psilocybin for people in end of life care, people on hospice. When somebody's on hospice, basically the idea is they have a terminal illness and they're expected to live only a certain amount of time, right? That doesn't necessarily mean like they're dying like tonight, but it could be weeks, months. This woman had cancer. And she reported that she was feeling a lot of guilt because she knew that, a year from now she's gone and her adolescent daughter was going to be having to live in this world on her own, without mom's guidance. And she was feeling a lot of guilt, about that. So she went into the experience and she took the psilocybin mushrooms, right? I think they made a pill or something probably because it was a clinical trial. And there was a guide there, and she's laying in a hospital bed. And she said that as she laid there on her bed, she felt the bed transform into hands. And she described this as a beautiful, comfortable experience, not like a scale, like creepy hands or something, right? Nothing like that. It was like,
and it wasn't jazz hands. Right?
No, not jazz hands.
Okay.
It was the hands represented the universe. And it was holding her and supporting her. And in this experience, she said that she realized that those hands of the universe have always been there supporting her. And that they'd be there for her daughter when she's gone. And that, every time I even think about it, I get goosebumps.
Yeah.
Because that's a very powerful experience for a human to have. Just to go from, I feel guilty because I'm going to die and leave my daughter alone, to, wow, I've always been supported by the universe and so will my daughter.
Wow.
That is a very transformative experience for somebody to have.
Well, listen to the language. It's like you've went into the past and you've changed it.
Yeah.
Not just the present.
That's
but everything is
right.
accessed from the present.
Yeah.
Right?
Even the future.
Even the future.
was changed.
The best way to predict the future is to create it.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, you're reminding me this whole idea of laying in the hands thing. I used to be afraid of spiders.
Okay.
And one day, I was walking along in the evening somewhere in Newport/Corona Del Mar, and I was with a dear friend whom you know very well.
Okay.
I've known most of my life.
Okay.
And I think we took quite a large amount of mushrooms, if I am not mistaken. I think we may have taken probably, 4 times the standard dose.
Okay.
At least. We were into kind of pushing the edge of the envelope in those days. Anyway, we were wandering amongst the beautiful, expensive homes. Sorry, Newport. There are creepy people walking around in the middle of the night. But yeah, we were walking around. We weren't creepy, but we were.
And they're not even rich.
Yeah, exactly. Not then. At some point, this overwhelming, I guess you call it a sleepiness or something, a soporific kind of quality was starting to creep through my bones. And I almost heard or felt, this is what I'm talking about, synesthesia, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I heard it, felt it, or saw it.
Yeah.
But I was drawn to this bed of ivy, speaking of beds, and this great ficus tree that was surrounding it and kind of overhanging its branches and leaves. And I crawled up on top of it. It was a little bit raised, this raised bed. And I laid down. I was in my, I think I was probably wearing black boots and a leather jacket. That was like my standard issue at the time with jeans. And I laid down in the ivy, and it was as though I was hearing this chorus of beautiful lullabies and songs and fairy music and whatever. And I laid down, and my friend was there. Our friend was there. And as I laid there, for a moment, it occurred to me, oh yes, this is a bed of ivy. There are tons and tons and tons of bugs, especially spiders, ants, and you name it. But I laid there, and there was a certain point at which I decided that was not the case, that I could trust whatever it was that was beckoning me to lie down.
Yeah.
So I lay there, and I felt so incredibly comfortable that I imagined that I was almost dissolving into the ivy.
Okay.
And at this point, it became more of not just a mental picture, but a kinesthetic feeling, as though the roots, the branches, the ivy, the leaves, everything about my current state was just all connected as one unit, one universe together. And I felt so extremely loved. Suddenly, my heart opened like you would not believe. I felt that grandmother tree, or Gaia, or something, some feminine, wise, protective, nurturing energy was cradling me. And it was cradling me so deeply. It's like if I could have burst into tears, I would have. It was just so blissful at the same time. I just completely surrendered to this being nurtured feeling. And at that point, the sounds that I was hearing, whether they were real or imaginary, was as though I was hearing every little bug in the entire environment I was in, chirping and grinding and walking. And I started to feel as though it wouldn't matter if they were working their way through my hair, my ears, along my neck, or in my clothes. It didn't matter to me. I decided to be so equanimous and just let go and be in harmony, almost as though there are no enemies here. We're just doing this together, and we are one. Which is another quality of psychedelics, is that unification experience that happens for a lot of people who take them. So I'm laying there, and I felt perfectly comfortable. I did feel like there were insects crawling on me, but I didn't feel irritated by it. I relaxed. And after a little while, it completed its cycle of whatever it was doing in that experience for me. I felt very alert, very clear, very peaceful. I remember sitting up and kind of thinking I was going to have to get all these bugs off of me, and I didn't. And I felt so extremely lucid at that point. So I emerged from this beautiful spiritual nap, if you will, feeling so incredibly crystal clear. Every thought, every word, I felt in complete control of my body, really unified. There was just absolute clarity. It's like I was coming out of deep meditation or something. It was really, really cool.
Nice.
And it was all about surrendering. And I remember learning something about letting go and trusting your environment that has always stuck with me.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like you really rewired your neurons around that issue.
I did. And from then on, I was not afraid of spiders.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Gosh, what a beautiful story.
A great advantage that I found in my exploration into psychedelics is this whole idea of getting in touch with your primal awareness. We talked about senses. Okay. That's a big part of that. But I feel that there's a side of me which is underneath, the cultured version of me, and is underneath those memories and exists instinctually. And there may be something else beyond that instinct as well. Maybe a part of me which can relearn the environment from a different set of experiences. So when I first took psychedelics, I really, really had this intention that I would explore what was possible. And I trusted that nature was my friend, that I could learn from nature, So the idea of Great Spirit, the idea of the Tao was already in my mind when I took it. So when I would take these things, naturally, I would go to what I knew. I would breathe, I would stand, I would feel my posture, I would do Kung Fu, I would climb, I would crawl around, I would transform myself into animals and adopt their postures and make their sounds, and I would have kind of hypnotic, self-induced ecstasy, ecstasis, right? These experiences of whipping myself up into a fury of feelings, and then channeling that to create gnosis.
Okay.
Because that whole idea of having like an atavism, an atavistic resurgence, a part of your deep, like Do you remember the movie and the book Altered States?
Yes. Love
Right?
that movie.
John C. Lilly and all that.
Yeah.
When he became temporarily like a primal human,
Yeah.
that was an example of atavistic resurgence.
Okay.
You know, when an ancient, an earlier form of something kind of spontaneously shows back up again in the lineage of birth, right? You occasionally you see this in fish and reptiles sometimes, where a trait like having an extra spot or something suddenly pops back in. And you're like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
And so they call that an atavistic resurgence. So there's this sort of psychospiritual version of that, which is explored in chaos magic and in various primal teachings that, and in shamanism and things, this idea that you can awaken earlier memories from before you were born because you contain everything within you already.
Right. You're just a continuation of an ancient process. And
Right.
so you can
And
access
so if you
it
can
somehow.
resonate in the right way for long enough, that it would just happen.
Yeah.
So I've had some strange experiences in that department. And I think that psychedelics offer a menu of experiences like that, which could be life-changing.
Wow.
You know,
And, it's just quickly worth noting that John C. Lilly was a very big fan of ketamine.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he did quite a bit of LSD.
Yeah, he did other things too. Yeah, but
He mapped
was,
consciousness.
Yeah, that's what he was doing. He was a consciousness researcher, and he developed the sensory deprivation tank.
Yeah.
And I guess was a very big fan of ketamine, using that in the tanks as part of his research.
There's a fascinating interview of him that Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove did.
Yes,
Do you remember that?
I know the
Where
one you're
he was-
talking about. And
he's wearing the
like,
cap,
the coon hat.
The coon hat, yeah, with the tail
Yeah,
and everything.
it's
That's
hilarious.
great.
It's great.
And he came accompanied with his lady or ladies.
Okay.
If I remember
Oh,
correctly.
man, that's great.
Yeah, he was a trip.
Yeah,
to put
literally
it
and
lightly.
figuratively.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So anyway, primal awareness, I think that's a big memory. And at this stage, as almost 48, I would say, I have to be a little more careful about how much primal awareness I activate, because the body is in a different state than it was when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't think I would be running down the mountain quite the same way as I did in my 20s. But,
right. You think twice before jumping off something a
but
little too high.
Certainly exploring a bit, and certainly testing my limits a little. If you don't do that, you never gain anything.
Right.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah.
You have to have a sense of courage when you do psychedelics. You don't have to be unafraid. I want to be clear on that.
Sure.
A sense of courage means you get that this is really important. You're doing it anyway. It's not that you're unafraid. I was absolutely moving forward in spite of the fear.
Yeah.
Because, as we say in NLP, you're always proceeding forward with a lack of knowledge. You never know what you're getting into.
Right.
It's not about having everything being predictable and knowing, It's about not knowing.
Yeah, right. Somebody had given Alan Watts LSD. Alan Watts, the great, philosopher. And he had a lot of positive things to say about it. I remember hearing one of his talks about this. And he tackled the question as to whether everybody should do it or not. And I've shared this with you before. I thought he gave a brilliant answer. It's like basically, would you encourage everybody to use psychedelics? And he said, well, it's like sailing a sailboat around the world. Yeah, it's an amazing experience. And for those people who need to sail a sailboat around the world, yes, they should do it. But not necessarily everybody should get in a sailboat and sail around the world.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would totally agree with that. Not everyone should do psychedelics. How would you know? I think the first filter is, do you have a genuine desire? That's number one. And I think along with that, you have to be honest with yourself about your mental health. I don't think it's wise to do it lightly. It should be done with respect. That much we can agree with the ancient model, right? The shamanic model. Have respect for yourself and for the substance you're going to ingest if you do it. And do your research. Satisfy your mind. You have a mind for a reason. Your head is telling you this or that. So do some investigation. Don't be satisfied until you feel satisfied about it. And then check in with your heart. What does your heart say? Is there potential for growth here? Could you potentially stand to walk away with some powerful tools? And I think if you ask your head and your heart and you get them in line, you're probably good to go. But other than that, some people have raised the objection. This is what I hear sometimes. Well, I already do all that. Why would I need to do that? I don't need to do blah, 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 right? I hear that. And it's like, you're right. You don't have to. And you can't really speak about the experience until you've had it. So anything that you might think that you're not doing, you probably don't have any clue because you haven't done it. Once you have done it, well, then you've done it and welcome to the club. But until then, you're just talking about it as though you know about it, but you can't. No one can tell you what the matrix is. You have to experience it for yourself. And once you do, you'll likely not regret it. And you'll likely have a lot of things in the world that will remind you that you're not the only one, that you're joining a company of people in this planet who've for centuries and centuries done this. So it's really not something to be afraid of. It's definitely just something to respect. As to whether or not the states of mind that you achieve are real, I think that deserves some comment, because you and I grew up in a tradition where we were hearing things like, oh, those states, they're going to damage your aura, or it's going to cause you to have lifetimes of work to do on yourself because you've damaged yourself. And
you'll burn out your throat chakra.
Right. All these different sort of...
You'll go blind in your third eye.
And they're basically the same thing. It's the 1950s fear-mongering dressed up as, spiritual psychobabble. It's not true. And there are enough anecdotal sort of references to spiritual teachers who are considered high-level spiritual teachers who have lots of things to say that are, that would counter that. But at the end of the day, it's still your critical faculty that has to be engaged. Why would you say that? How could you possibly know? And how many times have you been exposed to someone who probably has done it many, many times and you just didn't know? If they suddenly said, hey, by the way, I've done it 100 times, would you then suddenly change your opinion of them simply because they now told you that they've been doing it? When all of these months or years you've been trusting their guidance? That's the thing that really reveals how unscientific and how uncritical those statements are. You wouldn't know whether your teacher has done it or not unless they told you the truth. And it may not be a safe environment, especially in an environment where there's so much fear and fear of punishment and stigma and all that. People don't tell you. So there are lots of people who have turned on. And they just didn't tell you. You found out maybe later, maybe they told you later, but so the states being real, I think that's a problem statement in itself, because
I do too, actually.
What is real?
Yeah.
It gets down to that silly old thing. What is real, right?
Yeah.
If you can demonstrate that what you've learned is effectively changing the way you do the world, as far as I'm concerned, that's real. If you have a realization while in a trip that you are in charge of your life and you need to make better choices, and suddenly you start making better choices, how can you then claim that spiritual realization wasn't a real spiritual realization if it actually changed your life?
Yeah, you are no longer afraid of spiders.
Right.
That's a fact.
Right.
That's real.
Right. When you have deepened appreciation, it's deepened appreciation. If you're pointing to the examples of people who've misused it as your example for why psychedelics are wrong or bad for you, well, then again, that's again the straw man argument. That's pointing to something that isn't really the argument at all.
Yeah, let's throw all the scalpels away because somebody got stabbed in an alley.
Right. It's apples and oranges kind of thing. There is a communal and tribal element to psychedelics. It always has been that way.
Yeah.
And when you do it in a tribe of people that you care about, you learn more and you anchor in that learning for each other. So it can become a very beautiful experience. And when you go to cultures like I did in Peru, where you see these native people, they live that way. It's very matter of fact. Like plant medicines and psychedelics are very much just a part of life. There's nothing unusual about it. It's just sacred, but it's not unusual. Sacredness is part of their life.
Yeah.
And so it's woven literally into the tapestry of their life.
Yeah.
Not just the stories, but physically they're weaving fabric, telling stories in fabric, not just metaphorically.
It's funny.
And it's right there, eating the mushrooms and the shaman and this and various, experiences and spirit. So anyway, having a group of people that you trust and love that you can experience psychedelics with is a powerful and I think maybe even a necessary social good. It'd be really good for the planet if there were more pockets of people doing it. Like I said, not everyone, but
sure,
certainly
more sailors,
more of them, more sailors,
more sailors,
appreciating the ocean.
Nice.
Psychonauts, right?
Psychonauts.
They're sailors of the mind.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. The show is produced by Oliver Althoen, that's me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was composed by Oliver Althoen, and that's me again. If you're interested, this song is part of an album I did called Obsidian Kite, which you can find wherever you get your music. Check it out, it's fun. Please remember to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. We're all over the place. And find us on social media. Leave us a comment, drop us a line. We would love to hear from you. And our actual website is authenticityshow.com. Thank you for listening, and have an authentic day.